The 14th of August, 1834, was the day fixed upon for the sailing of the brig Pilgrim on her voyage from Boston round Cape Horn to the western coast of North America. I made my appearance on board at 12 o'clock in full sea rig and with my chest containing an outfit for a 2 or 3 years voyage, which I had undertaken from a determination to cure, if possible, by an entire change of life and by a long absence from books and study, a weakness of the eyes. The change from the tight dress coat, silk cap and kid gloves of an undergraduate at Cambridge to the loose duck trousers, check shirt and tarpaulin hat of a sailor, though somewhat of a transformation, was soon made. I supposed that I should pass very well for a jack-tar, but it is impossible to deceive the practiced eye in these matters, and while I supposed myself to be looking as salt as Neptune himself, I was, no doubt, known for a landsman by everyone on board as soon as I hove in sight. A sailor has a peculiar cut to his clothes and a way of wearing them which a green hand can never get. The next day we were employed in preparations for sea, and on the following night I stood my first watch. So great were my ideas of the importance of my trust that I walked regularly fore and aft the whole length of the vessel, and was not a little surprised at the coolness of the old salt, whom I called to take my place, in stowing himself snugly away under the long boat for a nap. That was a sufficient lookout, he thought, for a fine night, at anchor in a safe harbour. The next morning, a breeze having sprung up from the southward, we took a pilot on board, hove up our anchor, and began beating down the bay. I took leave of those of my friends who came to see me off, and had barely opportunity to take a last look at the city, as no time is allowed on board ship for sentiment. About midnight, the wind became fair, and having called the captain, I was ordered to call all hands. In a short time, everyone was in motion, the sails loosed, the yards braced, and we began to heave up the anchor, which was our last hold upon Yankee land. My little knowledge of a vessel was all at fault. Unintelligible orders were so rapidly given and so immediately executed. There was such a hurrying about, and such an intermingling of strange cries and stranger actions, that I was completely bewildered. There is not so helpless and pitiable an object in the world as a landsman beginning a sailor's life. At length, those peculiar, long-drawn sounds, which denote that the crew are heaving at the windlass, began, and in a few moments we were under way. The noise of the water thrown from the bows began to be heard. The vessel leaned over from the damp night breeze and rolled with the heavy ground swell, and we had actually begun our long, long journey. This was literally bidding good night to my native land. The first day we passed at sea was the Sabbath, as we were just from port, and there was a great deal to be done on board. We were kept at work all day, and at night the watches were set. When we were called aft to be divided, the captain gave a short characteristic speech. "Now, my men," he said, walking the quarter-deck with a cigar in his mouth, "we have begun a long voyage. If we get along well together, we shall have a comfortable time. If we don't, we shall have hell afloat. All you've got to do is to obey your orders and do your duty like men. Then you'll fare well enough. If you don't, you'll fare hard enough, I can tell you. If we pull together, you'll find me a clever fellow. If we don't, you'll find me a bloody rascal. That's all I've got to say. Go below, the larboard watch." I, being in the starboard watch, had the opportunity of keeping the first watch at sea. I had now a fine time for reflection. I felt for the first time the perfect silence of the sea. However much I was affected by the beauty of the sea, the bright stars and the clouds driven swiftly over them, I could not but remember that I was separating myself from all the social and intellectual enjoyments of life. Yet, strange as it may seem, I did then and afterwards take pleasure in these reflections, hoping by them to prevent my becoming insensible to the value of what I was leaving. But all my dreams were soon put to flight by an order from the officer to trim the yards. I could plainly see by the dark clouds that were fast coming up that we had bad weather to prepare for. I now began to feel the first discomforts of a sailor's life. The steerage in which I lived was filled with coils of rigging, spare sails, and ship stores. Moreover, there had been no berths built for us to sleep in. To crown all, we were allowed no light to find anything with, and I was just beginning to feel strong symptoms of seasickness. Giving up all attempts to collect my things together, I lay down upon the sails, expecting every moment to hear the cry of "All hands ahoy," which the approaching storm would soon make necessary. I shortly heard the raindrops falling on deck, and then the loud cry of "All hands ahoy, tumble up here and take in sail," saluted our ears. When I got upon deck, a new scene was before me. The little brig was close hauled upon the wind, and lying over, as it then seemed to me, nearly upon her beam ends. The heavy head sea was beating against her bows with the noise and force almost of a sledgehammer, and flying over the deck, drenching us completely through. In addition to all this, I had not got my sea legs on, was dreadfully sick, with hardly strength enough to hold on to anything, and it was pitch dark. This was my state when I was ordered aloft for the first time to reef topsails. How I got along, I cannot now remember. I laid out on the yards and held on with all my strength. I could not have been of much service. This state of things continued for 2 days. On the third day, the sun rose clear. We had a fine wind, and everything was bright and cheerful. I had now got my sea legs on, and was beginning to enter upon the regular duties of a sea life. At about 2 o'clock, we heard the loud cry of "Sail ho!" from aloft. This was the first time that I had seen a sail at sea. I thought then, and have always since, that it exceeds every other sight in interest and beauty. They passed to leeward of us, and out of hailing distance, but the captain could read the names on their sterns. They were the ship Helen Mar of New York and the brig Mermaid of Boston. They were both steering westward and were bound in for our dear native land. As we had now a long spell of fine weather, I can describe the duties and customs of an American merchantman. The captain, in the first place, is Lord Paramount. He stands no watch, comes and goes when he pleases, and is accountable to no one, and must be obeyed in everything without a question. The Prime Minister is the chief mate. He is first lieutenant, boatswain, sailing master, and quartermaster. The captain tells him what he wishes to have done, and leaves to him the care of overseeing. The second mate is proverbially a dog's berth. He is neither officer nor man. The men do not respect him as an officer, and he is obliged to go aloft to reef and furl the topsails, and to put his hands into the tar and slush with the rest. The crew are divided into 2 watches. The chief mate commands the larboard, and the second mate the starboard. They divide the time between them, being on deck and below, every other 4 hours. Nothing is more common than to hear people say, "Are not sailors very idle at sea? What can they find to do?" In the first place, then, the discipline of the ship requires every man to be at work upon something when he is on deck, except at night and on Sundays. In no state prison are the convicts more regularly set to work and more closely watched. When first leaving port, studding sail gear is to be rove, all the running rigging to be examined, then the standing rigging is to be overhauled, replaced, and repaired in 1,000 different ways. If after all this labour, after exposing their lives and limbs in storms, wet and cold. The merchants and captains think that they have not earned their $12 a month, out of which they clothe themselves, and their salt beef and hard bread. They keep them picking oakum. I have seen oakum stuff placed about in different parts of the ship, so that the sailors might not be idle in the snatches between the frequent squalls upon crossing the equator. Some officers have been so driven to find work for the crew that they have set them to pounding the anchors and scraping the chain cables. The Philadelphia Catechism is, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thou art able, and on the 7th, holystone the decks and scrape the cable. On September 22nd, when coming on deck in the morning, we found the other watch aloft, throwing water upon the sails, and looking astern, we saw a small clipper-built brig with a black hull heading directly after us. The captain, who watched her with his glass, said that she was armed and full of men, and showed no colours. We continued running dead before the wind, knowing that we sailed better so. Early in the morning she was overhauling us a little, but as the wind grew lighter, we began to leave her astern. Fortunately, there was no moon, and the night which followed was exceedingly dark, so that by putting out all the lights on board and altering our course 4 points, we hoped to get out of her reach. At daybreak, there was no sign of anything in the horizon, and we kept the vessel off to her course. On Wednesday, October 1st, we crossed the equator in longitude 24 degrees west. I now, for the first time, felt at liberty, according to the old usage, to call myself a son of Neptune, and was very glad to be able to claim the title without the disagreeable initiation which so many have to go through. On Sunday, October 5th, a man on the forecastle called out, "Land ho!" I had never heard the cry before, and did not know what it meant, but I soon found that there was land stretching along on our weather beam. As we ran in towards the coast, we found that we were directly off the port of Pernambuco. At 2 p.m, we again kept off before the wind, leaving the land on our quarter, and at sundown, it was out of sight. It was here that I first saw one of those singular things called catamarans. They are composed of logs lashed together upon the water, have one large sail, and are trusted as good sea boats. We saw several, with from 1 to 3 men in each, boldly putting out to sea, after it had become almost dark. After taking a new departure from Olinda, we kept off on our way to Cape Horn. We met with nothing remarkable until we were in the latitude of the river La Plata. Here there are violent gales from the southwest, called pamperos. We got the first touch of one during my watch on deck. It was very black in the southwest, and in about 10 minutes we saw a distinct flash. The wind, which had been southeast, had now left us, and it was dead calm. We sprang aloft immediately and furled the royals and top gallant sails. A huge mist capped with black clouds came driving towards us. It came upon us at once with a blast and a shower of hail and rain, which almost took our breath from us. The little vessel ran for some time directly before it, tearing through the water with everything flying. Having called all hands, we close-reefed the topsails. This was the first blow that I had seen, which could really be called a gale. On Tuesday, November 4th, at daybreak, we saw land upon our larboard quarter. These were the Falkland Islands. At sunset, the second mate said that he saw land on the starboard bow. This must have been the island of Staten Land, and we were now in the region of Cape Horn, with a fine breeze from the northward, and every prospect of a speedy and pleasant passage round. The weather was fine during the previous night, and we had a clear view of the Magellan Clouds and of the Southern Cross. Just before 8 o'clock, the cry of "All hands ahoy" was sounded, and hurrying upon deck, we found a large black cloud rolling on toward us from the southwest. "Here comes Cape Horn," said the chief mate, and we had hardly time to haul down and clew up before it was upon us. In a few moments, a heavier sea was raised than I had ever seen before, and as it was directly ahead, the little brig plunged into it, and all the forward part of her was under water. In the lee scuppers, it was up to a man's waist. We sprang aloft and double-reefed the topsails, but this would not do. The brig was labouring against the head sea, and the gale was growing worse and worse. At the same time, sleet and hail were driving with all fury against us. Here was an end to our fine prospects. We made up our minds to head winds and cold weather. Throughout the night it stormed violently. Rain, hail, snow, and sleet beating upon the vessel. The clouds cleared away at sunrise, and the wind becoming more fair, we again made sail. But at night we had the same scene over again. This night it was my turn to steer for 2 hours. Inexperienced as I was, I made out to steer to the satisfaction of the officer, and neither S, a young man making his first voyage like myself, nor myself gave up our tricks, all the time that we were off the Cape. This was something to boast of, for it requires a good deal of skill and watchfulness to steer a vessel close-hauled in a gale of wind against a heavy head sea. We had now got hardened to Cape weather. The vessel was under reduced sail, and everything secured on deck and below, so that we had little to do but to steer and to stand our watch. Our clothes were all wet through, and the only change was from wet to more wet. I remember an English lad who was always the life of the crew, standing for nearly 10 minutes at the galley with his pot of tea in his hand, waiting for a chance to get down into the forecastle, and seeing what he thought was a smooth spell, started to go forward. He had just got to the end of the windlass when a great sea broke over the bows, and for a moment I saw nothing of him but his head and shoulders, and at the next instant, being taken off his legs, he was carried aft with the sea, until her stern lifting up and sending the water forward, he was left high and dry at the side of the longboat, still holding on to his tin pot, which had now nothing in it but salt water. But nothing could ever daunt him. Regaining his legs and shaking his fist at the man at the wheel, he rolled below, saying, as he passed, "A man's no sailor if he can't take a joke." On Monday, November 19, a black day in our calendar, at 7 o'clock in the morning, it being our watch below, we were aroused from a sound sleep by the cry of "All hands ahoy! A man overboard!" This unwanted cry sent a thrill through the heart of every one, and hurrying on deck, we found the vessel hove flat aback. The watch on deck were lowering away the quarterboat, and I got on deck just in time to heave myself into her as she was leaving the side. But it was not until out upon the wide Pacific in our little boat that I knew whom we had lost. It was George Bulmer, a young English sailor, who was prized by the officers as an active and willing seaman, and by the crew as a lively, hearty fellow and a good shipmate. He was going aloft to fit a strap round the main top masthead, and at the strap and block a coil of halyards and a marline spike about his neck. He fell from the starboard futtock shrouds, and not knowing how to swim, and being heavily dressed, with all those things round his neck, he probably sank immediately. We pulled astern, in the direction in which he fell, and though we knew that there was no hope of saving him, yet no one wished to speak of returning, and we rowed about for nearly an hour, unwilling to acknowledge to ourselves that we must give him up. At length, we turned the boat's head and made towards the vessel, Death is at all times solemn, but never so much so as at sea. A man dies on shore, his body remains with his friends, and the mourners go about the streets. But when a man falls overboard at sea and is lost, there is a suddenness in the event and a difficulty in realizing it, which give to it an air of awful mystery. A man is near you, at your side. You hear his voice, and in an instant he is gone, and nothing but a vacancy shows his loss. We had hardly returned on board with our sad report before an auction was held of the poor man's clothes. The captain had first, however, called all hands aft and asked them if they were satisfied that everything had been done to save the man. The crew all said that it was in vain, so we then filed away and kept her off to her course. The jackets and trousers in which we had seen him dressed but a few days before were exposed and bid off, while the life was hardly out of his body, and his chest was taken aft and used as a store chest, so that there was nothing left which could be called his. We continued sailing along with a fair wind and fine weather until Tuesday, November the 25th, when at daylight we saw the island of Juan Fernandez directly ahead, rising like a deep blue cloud out of the sea. At length we could distinguish trees and rocks, and by the afternoon this beautiful island lay fairly before us. Arriving at the entrance soon after sundown, we did not come to an anchor until nearly midnight. We had a boat ahead all the time, and our anchor struck bottom for the first time since we left Boston. 103 days. When all hands were called, it was nearly sunrise. The harbour was nearly landlocked, and at the head of it was a landing place, protected by a small breakwater of stones. Near this was a variety of huts or cottages, nearly 100 in number, the best of them built of mud and whitewashed, but the greater part only Robinson Crusoe-like, of posts and branches of trees. The mountains were high, green and well wooded, with some large and exceedingly fertile valleys. After breakfast, the second mate was ordered ashore with 5 hands to fill the water casks, and to my joy, I was among the number. The water was too thick and muddy to be put into the casks, and the governor had sent men up to the head of the stream to clear it out for us, which gave us nearly 2 hours of leisure. This we employed in wandering about among the houses and eating a little fruit which was offered to us. Ground apples, melons, grapes, strawberries of an enormous size, and cherries abound here. A steady, though light southwesterly wind carried us well off from the island, and the next day, upon coming on deck in the morning, we were again upon the wide Pacific, and saw no more land until we arrived upon the western coast of the great continent of America. We caught the southeast trades, and ran before them for nearly 3 weeks, without so much as altering a sail or bracing a yard. The captain took advantage of this fine weather to get the vessel in order for coming upon the coast. At length we began to heave to after dark, for fear of making the land at night on a coast where there are no lighthouses, and at daybreak on the morning of Tuesday, January 13th, 1835, we made the land at Point Conception. The port of Santa Barbara, to which we were bound, lying about 50 miles to the southward of this point. We continued sailing down the coast during the day and following night, and on the next morning we came to anchor in the spacious bay of Santa Barbara, after a voyage of 150 days from Boston. In the first place, it was a beautiful day, and so warm that we had on straw hats and all the summer gear, and as this was midwinter, it spoke well for the climate. The large bay lay about us, nearly smooth, as there was hardly a breath of wind stirring. The mission and town of Santa Barbara lie on a low, flat plain, but a little above the level of the sea, covered with grass, though entirely without trees, and surrounded on 3 sides by an amphitheatre of mountains. The mission stands a little back of the town, and is a large building, in the centre of which is a high tower, with a belfry of 5 bells. The town lies a little nearer to the beach, about half a mile from it, and is composed of 1-story houses built of brown clay, some of them plastered, with red tiles on the roofs. In the midst of them stands the presidio, or fort, built of the same materials. Just before sundown, the mate ordered a boat's crew ashore, and I went as one of the number. The sun had just gone down. It was getting dusky. The damp night wind was beginning to blow, and the heavy swell of the Pacific was setting in and breaking in loud and high combers upon the beach. We lay on our oars in the swell, just outside of the surf, waiting for a good chance to run in. The second mate steered our boat, and seeing how a crew of Sandwich Islanders from another vessel managed it, we too gave 3 or 4 long and strong pulls, and went in on top of a great wave, throwing our oars overboard, and jumping out the instant that the boat touched the beach, and then seizing hold of her and running her up high and dry upon the sand. We lay here about a fortnight, employed in landing goods and taking off hides, occasionally, when the surf was not high. This was the work in which we were soon to be engaged, and we learned the California style. The hides are always brought down dry. They are doubled once, lengthwise, with the hair side usually in, and we take them upon our heads, 1 at a time, or 2 if they are small, and wade out with them and throw them into the boat. The great art is in getting them on the head. I have often been laughed at myself, and joined in laughing at others, pitching themselves down in the sand, trying to swing a large hide upon their heads. The captain made it harder for us by telling us that it was California fashion to carry 2 on the head at a time, and as he insisted upon it, we carried 2 for the first few months. But after finding that other vessels carried only 1 at a time, we knocked off the extra one. After a stay of about a fortnight, we left Santa Barbara for San Pedro. We came to anchor at a distance of 3 or 3.5 miles from shore. The land was of a clay consistency, and as far as the eye could reach, entirely bare of trees and even shrubs, and there was no sign of a town, not even a house to be seen. No sooner had we come to anchor than the preparations for southeasters were got ready. We loaded our longboat with goods of all kinds, and after landing and rolling them over the stones upon the beach, we stopped, waiting for the carts to come down the hill and take them. But the captain ordered us to carry them all up to the top, saying that that was California fashion. So what the oxen would not do, we were obliged to do. The hill was low but steep, and the earth, being clay and wet with the recent rains, was but bad holding ground for our feet. The heavy barrels and casks we rolled up with some difficulty. The greatest trouble was with the large boxes of sugar. These we had to place upon oars, and lifting them up, rest the oars upon our shoulders, and creep slowly up the hill. For several days the captain seemed very much out of humour. His displeasure was chiefly turned against a large, heavy-moulded fellow called Sam. The captain took a dislike to him, thought he was surly and lazy. About 10 o'clock on Friday, the captain was down in the hold, where the crew were at work, when we heard his voice raised in violent dispute with somebody. I leaned down the hatchway and knew that the captain had the advantage, for his voice was loud and clear. "You see your condition. You see your condition. Will you ever give me any more of your jaw?" No answer, and then came wrestling and heaving. "You may as well keep still, for I have got you," said the captain. Then came the question, "Will you ever give me any more of your jaw?" "I never gave you any, sir," said Sam, for it was his voice that we heard. "That's not what I ask you. Will you ever be impudent to me again?" "I never have been, sir," said Sam. "Answer my question, or I'll make a spread eagle of you. I'll flog you by G." "I'm no Negro slave," said Sam. "Then I'll make you one," said the captain. And he came to the hatchway and sprang on deck, threw off his coat, and rolling up his sleeves, called out to the mate, "Seize that man up, Mr. A. Seize him up. Make a spread eagle of him. I'll teach you all who is master aboard." Sam, by this time, was placed against the shrouds, with his wrists made fast, his jacket off, and his back exposed. The captain stood on the break of the deck and held in his hand the bight of a thick, strong rope. The officers stood round, and the crew grouped together in the waist. All these preparations made me feel sick and almost faint, angry and excited as I was. A man, a human being, made in God's likeness, fastened up and flogged like a beast. "What are you going to flog that man for, sir?" said John, the Swede, to the captain. Upon hearing this, the captain turned upon him, but knowing him to be quick and resolute, he ordered the steward to bring the irons, and calling upon Russell, our new officer, to help him, went up to John. "Let me alone," said John. "I'm willing to be put in irons. You need not use any force." And putting out his hands, the captain slipped the irons on and sent him aft to the quarter-deck. Swinging the rope over his head, the captain brought it down upon the poor fellow's back. Once, twice, 6 times. "Will you ever give me any more of your jaw?" The man writhed with pain, but said not a word. 3 times more. This was too much, and he muttered something which I could not hear. This brought as many more as the man could stand, when the captain ordered him to be cut down and to go forward. "Now for you," said the captain, making up to John and taking his irons off. When he was made fast, he turned to the captain, who stood turning up his sleeves and getting ready for the blow, and asked him what he was to be flogged for. "Have I ever refused my duty, sir?" "No," said the captain. "It is not that I flog you for. I flog you for your interference, for asking questions." "Can't a man ask a question here without being flogged?" "No," shouted the captain. "Nobody shall open his mouth aboard this vessel but myself," and began laying the blows upon his back. As he went on, his passion increased, and he danced about the deck, calling out as he swung the rope, "If you want to know what I flog you for, I'll tell you. It's because I like to do it. Because I like to do it. It suits me. That's what I do it for." The man writhed under the pain until he could endure it no longer, when he called out, "Oh Jesus Christ, oh Jesus Christ." "Don't call on Jesus Christ," shouted the captain. "He can't help you. Call on Captain T-. He's the man. He can help you. Jesus Christ can't help you now." At these words, my blood ran cold. I could look on no longer. Disgusted, sick, and horror-struck, I turned away and leaned over the rail. After the day's work was done, we went down into the forecastle. A gloom was over everything. The 2 men lay in their berths, groaning with pain, and we all turned in, but for myself, not to sleep. A sound coming now and then from the berths of the 2 men showed that they were awake. I thought of our situation, living under a tyranny, of the character of the country we were in, of the length of the voyage, and of the uncertainty attending our return to America, and vowed that if God should ever give me the means, I would do something to redress the grievances and relieve the sufferings of that poor class of beings, of whom I then was one. Having got all our spare room filled with hides, we hove up our anchor and made sail for San Diego. As we drew near, we brought the little harbor right before us. Everyone was anxious to get a view of the new place. The entrance is so narrow as to admit but one vessel at a time. There was no town in sight, but on the smooth sand beach were 4 large houses, built of rough boards and looking like great barns with piles of hides standing round them. These were the hide houses. We took possession of one of the hide houses, which belonged to our firm. It was built to hold 40,000 hides, and we had the pleasing prospect of filling it before we could leave the coast. In one corner of it, a small room was parted off, in which 4 berths were made where we were to live, with Mother Earth for our floor. Here we put our chests, threw our bedding into the berths, and took up our quarters. I was sent ashore with my things to join the gang at the hide house. A small hermaphrodite brig rounded the point and came to anchor. It was the Mexican brig Fazio, which we had left at San Pedro. She had come down to land her tallow, try it all over, and make new bags. They moored ship, erected their try-works on shore, put up a small tent in which they all lived, and commenced operations. They made an addition to our society, and we spent many evenings in their tent. Here was a change in my life. I was transformed from a sailor into a beachcomber and a hide curer. The first thing is to put the hides in soak. They lie for 48 hours when they are taken out and thrown into the vats, which contain a strong brine. From these vats, they are taken and spread upon the ground and carefully stretched and staked out to dry smooth. While yet wet and soft, we used to go upon them with our knives and carefully cut off all the bad parts. This was the most difficult part of our duty. The first day, I was so slow and awkward that I cleaned only 8. At the end of a few days, I doubled my number, and in a fortnight or 3 weeks, could clean my proportion, 25. After the sun has been upon them a few hours, they are gone over with scrapers to get off all the grease. This being done, the stakes are pulled up, and the hides carefully doubled with the hair side out and left to dry. The next day they are spread out again, and at night, if fully dry, are beaten with flails. This takes all the dust from them. Then, being salted, scraped, cleaned, dried, and beaten, they are stowed away in the house. We had been a few weeks on shore when the monotony of our life was interrupted by the arrival of 2 vessels from the windward. One was the Italian ship Rosa, and the brig proved to be the Catalina. They came to anchor and commenced discharging hides and tallow. The Rosa had purchased the house occupied by the Lagoda, and the Catalina took the other spare one between ours and the Ayacuchos, so that now each one was occupied, and the beach, for several days, was all alive. In about 6 weeks, we had got all the hides which the Pilgrim left us cured and stowed away. We were now through all our work, and had nothing more to do until the Pilgrim should come down again. Day after day, we went up the hill behind the hide house, but no ship was to be seen. On Tuesday, August 25th, just before noon, we heard a yell of "Sail ho!" from all parts of the beach. In an instant, everyone was out of his house, and there, sure enough, was a fine, tall ship, with royals and skysails set, coming rapidly round the point. Her yards were braced sharp up. The Yankee ensign was flying from her mizzen peak. It was nearly 6 months since a new vessel had entered San Diego. She was the Alert, the ship that we were expecting from Boston. I now made my application to the captain to go on board. He told me that I could go home in the ship when she sailed, and said he had no objection to my being on board while she was on the coast. if I could find one of my own age to exchange with me. This I easily accomplished, for they were glad to change the scene by a few months on shore, and I went on board the next day with my chest and hammock and found myself once more afloat. This was my first day's duty on board the ship, and though a sailor's life is a sailor's life wherever it may be, yet I found everything very different here from the customs of the brig Pilgrim. 3 minutes and a half were allowed for every man to dress and come on deck, and if any were longer than that, they were sure to be overhauled by the mate. The head pump was then rigged, and the decks washed down. Inside and out, fore and aft, upper deck and between decks, steerage and forecastle, rail, bulwarks and waterways were washed, scrubbed and scraped with brooms and canvas, and the decks were wet and sanded all over, and then holystoned. It was a great contrast to the worthy, quiet mate of the Pilgrim. Captain T, his entire change in conduct since he took command of the ship, was owing no doubt to this fact. If the chief officer wants force, discipline slackens. The captain interferes continually. That makes a difficulty between them, which encourages the crew, and the whole ends in a three-sided quarrel. But Mr. Brown, the mate of the Alert, wanted no help from anybody. On Friday, May 6th, we completed the taking in of our cargo. We had looked forward to this for 16 months as the first bright spot. When the last hide was stowed away and the hatches corked down, the chief mate sprang up on the top of the longboat, called all hands into the waist, and giving us a signal by swinging his cap over his head, we gave 3 long, loud cheers, which came from the bottom of our hearts and made the hills and valleys ring again. On Sunday, May 8th, all our spare spars were taken on board and lashed, our water casks secured, and our livestock, consisting of 4 bullocks, a dozen sheep, a dozen or more pigs, and 3 or 4 dozen of poultry, were all stowed away. Our unusually large cargo brought the ship channels down into the water. About 11 o'clock, the regular northwest wind set steadily in. All hands manned the windlass, and soon brought the anchor to the bows, and, with a fair wind and tide, we came swiftly and handsomely up to the city. Off the end of the wharf, we rounded to and let go our anchor. The head yards were filled away, and our ship began to move through the water on her homeward bound course. The California, which had arrived a week earlier, had got under way at the same moment. We sailed down the narrow bay abreast and kept each other company. We were now to the northward of the line, and every day added to our latitude. The Magellan clouds were sunk in the horizon, and the North Star and the Great Bear were rising in the heavens. Next to seeing land, there is no sight which makes one realize more that he is drawing near home. For 12 days, a steady breeze blew, not varying a point. At the end of 7 days from the time we took the breeze, on Sunday, June 5th, we were in latitude 19 degrees south, longitude 118 degrees west, having made 1,200 miles in 7 days. Our good ship was getting to be herself again. The crew ceased complaining of her, and the officers hove the log every 2 hours with evident satisfaction. This was glorious sailing, a steady breeze, the light trade wind clouds over our heads, the incomparable temperature of the Pacific, neither hot nor cold, a clear sun every day, and clear moon and stars each night. On Friday, September 16th, we were on the border of the Gulf Stream. A thick fog showed we were near the soundings. 8 o'clock came, and the watch went below, and for the whole of the first hour, the ship was tearing on, with studding sails out. At 2 bells, the captain came on deck, and we backed the after yards and got ready for sounding. A man on the spritsail yard with the lead another on the cathead, with a handful of the line coiled up, another in the forechains, another in the waist, and another in the main chains. Ave. Watch, ho, watch, sings out the man on the spritsail yard, and the heavy lead drops into the water, 80 fathoms and no bottom. At 4 bells backed again, hove the lead, and soundings, at 60 fathoms, hurrah for Yankee land. On Monday morning, the increased depth and deep blue colour of the water showed that we were in the channel and nearing George's Banks. Throughout the day, a provokingly light wind prevailed, and at 8 o'clock, a small fishing schooner told us we were nearly abreast of Chatham Lights. At 4 o'clock, thinking ourselves to the northward of Race Point, we hauled upon the wind and stood into the bay for Boston Light, and commenced firing guns for a pilot. We turned out of our own will at daybreak to get a sight of land. In the grey of the morning, 1 or 2 small fishing smacks peered out of the mist, and when the broad day broke upon us, there lay the low sand hills of Cape Cod over our larboard quarter, and before us the wide waters of Massachusetts Bay. About 10 o'clock, a little boat came bobbing over the water and put a pilot on board. About 2 o'clock, a breeze sprang up ahead from the westward, and we began beating up against it. Toward sundown, the wind came off in flaws. We made 2 long stretches, which brought us into the roads under the lee of the castle. He clewed up the topsails and let go the anchor, and for the first time since leaving San Diego, 135 days, our anchor was upon bottom. In half an hour more, we were lying snugly with all sails furled, safe in Boston Harbor. Our long voyage ended. The well-known scene about us, the dome of the State House fading in the western sky, the lights of the city starting into sight, and at 9 o'clock the clangor of the bells ringing their accustomed peals. The next morning, a sea breeze sprang up, and the pilot gave orders to get the ship under way. We manned the windlass, and the long-drawn yo heave ho, which we had last heard dying away among the desolate hills of San Diego, soon brought the anchor to the bows. We came swiftly and handsomely up to the city. Off the end of the wharf, we rounded to and let go our anchor, and no sooner was it on the bottom than the decks were filled with people. We took the warp ashore, manned the capstan, and with a chorus which waked up half the north end, we hauled her in to the wharf. The city bells were just ringing 1 when the last turn was made fast, and the crew dismissed, and in 5 minutes more, not a soul was left on board the good ship Alert, but the old shipkeeper, who had come down from the counting house to take charge of her.